The boardroom at Crescent Tech gleamed under harsh, white fluorescent lights. Polished mahogany stretched across the room, reflecting the anxious faces of 12 board members. I, Amara Bennett, sat at one end, shoulders squared, heart hammering like a gospel drum in a Sunday choir. The weight of 20 years in tech, the promotions, the sleepless nights, the mentorship of young black engineers, pressed down on me. Yet I refused to show it. Darius Caldwell, CEO by inheritance and charm, leaned forward, fingers steepled. His eyes glinted with a mixture of arrogance and disdain. "Amara," he said, voice smooth and deliberate, "you're a relic, a reminder of a Crescent Tech that no longer exists." The word struck me like ice water. Relic. My chest tightened, but my voice, calm as steel, cut through the tension. A relic? Tell me, Darius. Who navigated us through the 2008 market crash? Who built the secure infrastructure that keeps our billion-dollar acquisitions intact? Who nurtured every young engineer you now parade at your tech expos? A smirk flickered across his face. Exactly. The past doesn't matter. Crescent Tech is about speed, innovation, disruption. You're just an anchor, Amara. Silence settled like concrete. Not a single board member dared speak. 20 years of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights rendered invisible in a single sentence. Then he lifted a folder stamped with my name. The snap of paper against polished wood echoed like a gunshot. Your termination is effective immediately. The room felt colder than the bay wind in December. My pulse spiked, breath caught in my throat. Everything I had built, every late-night debugging session, every mentorship hour, vanished in his words. I rose, heels clicking against the marble floor, each step a symphony of betrayal. Faces turned, whispers hushed, screens dimmed, colleagues I had shielded from layoffs, engineers whose projects I had saved, watched me like I was already a ghost. My badge felt heavy in my fist, edges biting into my palm. A plastic rectangle holding 20 years of quiet victories no one would ever count. At the elevator, the golden doors reflected my tired but unbowed eyes. I refused to be invisible. And then, a voice. Soft but unwavering. "Without you, nothing runs." I turned. A young analyst, barely out of college, clutching reports like armor, met my gaze. Pride shone in his eyes. Undimmed by fear, the doors closed, sealing him inside. His words lingered like a gospel refrain. I had built the systems, the foundation, the lifeblood of Crescent Tech. Darius could erase my title, but he couldn't erase me. Humiliation burned, but beneath it, determination flickered. Endings sometimes look a lot like beginnings. Days later, news of Project Helios clearing its final review reached me. Helios wasn't just an algorithm, it was my lifeline. The bridge to fund my daughter Emily's surgery. A testament to every sacrifice made. Every line of code bore my fingerprints. Every contingency model carried my vigilance. Each simulation polished until dawn was a heartbeat secured. The day of the announcement, I walked into the auditorium with pride, only to see Darius take the stage. Tailored suit, confident grin, and the charm inherited from a lineage of privilege. He presented Helios as his visionary project, his triumph. My name never crossed his lips. Not once. Applause thundered. Executives leaned forward, nodding like disciples at a sermon. In that roar, I disappeared. Mara, my project lead, shifted uneasily beside me. She knew the truth. They all knew. Yet silence held the room captive. A knife sharper than Darius' theft. Rumors followed like a plague. I had mismanaged data, leaked proprietary information, betrayed Crescent Tech. Blogs branded me reckless, disloyal, a liability. Overnight, I became toxic. Badge access revoked. Colleagues I once mentored avoided me. Emails unanswered. My name whispered in corridors as a warning. But the fire inside me only grew. I walked the streets of San Francisco, headphones blasting Nina Simone and Kendrick Lamar, letting their rhythm stitch courage into my veins. My neighborhood, black-owned cafes, street murals, community centers, reminded me who I was: resilient, proud, unbroken. I reached out to old allies, young engineers I had mentored, black colleagues underestimated by corporate hierarchy. I whispered strategy over coffee. mapped out contingencies in quiet corners, and let every slight fuel my plan. Helios had been my weapon, and now it would be mine again. Weeks passed. Darius' presentation crumbled under scrutiny. Discrepancies in the algorithm, overlooked safeguards, and evidence of misappropriation surfaced. Crescent Tech's board convened in secret, whispers echoing like gospel hymns in darkened hallways. The day of reckoning. I entered the boardroom with composure. Every step measured, every breath deliberate. Darius' smirk faltered as murmurs spread. Documents I had secured, contracts I had inked, contingencies I had coded, all proof of my ownership and integrity, lay before the board. I built this company's future, I said, voice steady. Not just the algorithms, but the people, the infrastructure, the culture. You may have tried to erase me, Darius, but history remembers who builds, who protects, and who leads. Silence fell, not oppressive this time, but reverent. Eyes widened, respect glimmered where fear once dominated. By the end of the day, I wasn't just reinstated, I emerged stronger. My influence undeniable. Project Helios carried my name. Recognition, respect, and the admiration of my community followed. Darius, left to navigate the ruins of his own hubris. As I walked out, Emily's laughter rang in my ears. I paused, hand on the plaque marking Helios' launch. Pride surged, not just for the victory, but for the example I'd set. To my daughter, to young black engineers, to every woman underestimated in the room. Resilience matters. Integrity matters. And above all, never let anyone write the end of your story but you. And the worst part? I had nowhere to fight back. Every sacrifice, every promise I'd made to Emily, every hour I'd traded from my life, it all collapsed under one man's arrogance and a company's cowardice. I walked through Crescent Tech's glass corridors like a ghost. Screens glowed with dashboards and notifications. Phones buzzed, laughter echoed over coffee cups. And me? I was the woman erased. That night, in my Palo Alto apartment, lights off, jazz drifting faintly from the neighbor's speaker. I replayed it all, the applause for Darius, the rumors spreading like wildfire, the silence of those I had trusted. I pressed my hands to my temples, whispering to the empty room. Was I crazy to think loyalty meant something? No answer came, just the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the distant bass of a rooftop party, the city moving forward without me. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be truly disposable. Not a leader, not a strategist, just a shadow someone had decided to snuff out. But deep inside, beneath the humiliation, another feeling stirred, faint, unwelcome, but real, rage. Because Darius hadn't just stolen my career, he had gambled with Emily's future. And I wasn't ready to let him write the ending. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my heels, and collapsed onto the couch. For years, my life had been schedules, backups, contingency plans. Now, staring at the blank walls, I couldn't even imagine tomorrow. I poured a glass of red wine, swallowed half in a desperate gulp, and hurled the rest at the floor. The shards caught the lamplight like tiny constellations of broken promises. The crash echoed inside me, sharp, violent, final. It matched the slam of that boardroom door. My laptop glowed on the coffee table, Crescent Tech's logo pulsing like an accusation. I closed it gently, almost tenderly, as if shutting it could bury the betrayal. But I knew better. Then my phone buzzed. Mom, Houston. My throat tightened. How do you tell your mother that the daughter she bragged about in church, the one she thought was living the American dream, had just been discarded? I let the call go unanswered. The silence grew heavier. Memories forced their way in. My first day at Crescent Tech, swimming in a suit 2 sizes too big. Clutching my badge like it was sacred. Nights spent until dawn, saving deals with last-minute brilliance. Smoothing scandals before they reached the press. Proof I mattered. Receipts of loyalty. But loyalty is a one-way street. I had traded birthdays, holidays, grief. I still remember the call from my sister, telling me Dad had passed, while I waited in a crowded airport lounge for a red-eye to Berlin. I told myself it was worth it. That sacrifice was the price of building something real, something lasting. And now? A daughter with a failing heart. A career erased by a man who never built anything but illusions. And me, sitting in the ruins, wondering if all I had chased was smoke. For a terrifying moment, I wanted to disappear, to let the city swallow me whole. Erase me the way Crescent Tech had. The thought came fast, sharp, and left me trembling. And then, quiet, steady, unyielding, another voice rose inside me. They don't get to end your story here. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't kind. It burned like a bruise that refused to fade. I hated it, but I couldn't ignore it. I stood, legs shaky, but I stood, swept the shards into a towel, wiped the floor, dumped the wine down the sink. At the window, I looked down at University Avenue, cars humming past, strangers moving forward with battles of their own. Something shifted. The apartment felt smaller, the world outside, bigger. And for the first time since the betrayal, I let myself imagine. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the match. The morning after the glass shattered. Sunlight bled through the blinds. Head throbbed from wine. Body heavy. Mind restless. Something had shifted overnight. I dragged myself to the kitchen. Brewed coffee that smelled like burnt hope. And opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years. The cover worn. Pages yellowed. The journal where I sketched wild solutions no one at Crescent Tech cared to hear. Music from my speaker. Nina Simone's voice cutting through the silence. Reminded me of who I was. And slowly, purpose returned. My hand shook as I wrote. They don't get to end my story here. Just 7 words, but they felt like oxygen. Like the first deep breath after being trapped underwater. I stared at them, the ink soaking into paper like roots spreading beneath concrete. For the first time since the betrayal, I wasn't thinking about Crescent Tech, or Darius, or the headlines. I was thinking about survival. Not just mine, Emily's. Her laugh echoed in my memory. The way she clutched my sleeve in hospital corridors. The way her tiny hand fit inside mine like a promise. I remembered her 7th birthday. Her eyes wide and worried as she asked, "Mom, will I ever be okay?" I had promised her then. Clutching her little hand. "Yes, baby, one day, we'll fix your heart." That promise was louder than Crescent Tech's betrayal. So I stepped outside. Palo Alto was alive. Bikes zipping past on Emerson Street. The smell of fresh bagels drifting from the corner deli. A man arguing with his dog about crossing the street. Ordinary life. Messy, noisy, beautiful. And me, right in the middle of it. I bought a coffee I couldn't afford. Sat on a bench. And let the city move around me. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was simply there. I didn't know the next move. I didn't know how I would pay rent. Or scrape together the money for Emily's surgery. But I knew this much. I was still here. And sometimes, still here is enough to start again. Weeks blurred into survival. Freelance coding gigs. Nights spent balancing bills on the kitchen counter while Emily slept in the next room. I was exhausted, running on fumes and vending machine coffee. But every time doubt pressed in, I'd hear those 7 words from my notebook, echoing like a drumline through the silence. They don't own me. Not anymore. Then came the envelope. It had been buried in a stack of mail I almost tossed, past due notices. Medical bills. Another rent warning. But this one was different. Cream paper. Handwritten address. No return label. Inside was a letter sealed with a faded blue stamp. The name at the top made me freeze. Graham Holt. He had been Crescent Tech's legal counsel years ago. A quiet man with kind eyes who once told me, "Always keep your receipts. Amara, companies forget, but paper remembers." I hadn't thought of him since his obituary 2 winters back. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. "Amara, if you're reading this, it means Crescent Tech has done what I always feared, taken what isn't theirs. Enclosed you'll find documents proving your ownership of the core algorithms under patent trust. They can erase your badge, but they cannot erase your rights." I pulled out the enclosed papers. The signatures, the seals. My eyes raced across the lines. The patents weren't just partial. They were majority. 70%. 70% of Project Helios, mine. The room spun. I pressed my hand to the kitchen table, fighting the rush of disbelief. For months, I had been treated like a ghost. A liability. A thief. Now the truth sat in my hands. I wasn't powerless. Crescent Tech was standing on stolen ground. I laughed, sharp and bitter, startling even myself. They hadn't destroyed me. They had built their empire on my foundation. And empires built on stolen ground eventually fall. I tucked the papers back into the envelope. Heart pounding. For the first time in months. I didn't just feel anger. I felt fire. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. I didn't strike back right away. For weeks, I carried the envelope everywhere, tucked inside my worn leather bag like a secret heartbeat. Sometimes, when the fear of bills or the weight of Emily's cough pressed too hard, I would pull it out, trace the blue stamp with my thumb, and whisper to myself, "They don't own me. Not anymore." But knowing the truth and using it, those are two different battles. I started small, quiet nights, after Emily fell asleep with her stuffed rabbit curled under her chin. I spread the documents across the kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator was my soundtrack. The smell of chamomile tea cooled beside me. I combed through every line: patent trusts, legal clauses, signatures in faded ink. Each detail was a weapon waiting to be sharpened. I made notes in the margins, connecting dots like constellations, cross-references, dependencies, weak points in contracts, every loophole Darius had ignored, every clause Crescent Tech assumed would be buried and forgotten. I marked them all. I imagined the boardroom, Darius standing smugly, thinking he'd won. I imagined the moment I would place the truth on the table. And then, for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. Not because it was over, not yet, but because I was still here. Still breathing, still fighting, still Amara Bennett. I kept hearing Graham Holt's voice in my memory. Paper remembers. He had been right. These papers weren't just proof, they were a map. A blueprint for a reckoning. Still, I couldn't do it alone. I called Daniel Wu, an old friend from Stanford who had walked away from Silicon Valley's circus to become an independent IP lawyer. We hadn't spoken in years, not since graduation drinks when he teased me for marrying Crescent Tech instead of marrying life. But when I whispered, "I need help," he didn't ask questions. He just said, "Send me everything. Tonight." 2 days later, we met at a diner off El Camino Real. The kind of greasy, neon-lit place where the smell of bacon clung to your clothes for hours. Daniel flipped through the papers while sipping bitter coffee, brow furrowed deeper with every page. Finally, he looked up. "Amara, this isn't just leverage. This is ownership. You could freeze Crescent Tech tomorrow if you wanted." The words made me dizzy. Ownership. Freeze Crescent Tech. It sounded impossible, like toppling a skyscraper with a single stone. But as he spoke, the stone was already in my hand. "Not yet," I said. "They're expecting me to disappear. Let's keep it that way." Daniel smirked. "So you want to play ghost?" "No," I whispered. "I want to play architect." From that night on, my life split into two worlds. By day, I was the mother juggling freelance gigs, showing up at Stanford Hospital for Emily's checkups, pretending to be just another woman grinding through the Bay Area's chaos. I smiled at neighbors, paid bills late, kept my head down, ordinary, invisible. By night, I built an empire in miniature. I turned my apartment into a war room, walls plastered with post-its, diagrams on napkins, legal clauses pinned like battle plans. I mapped out journalists who could tell the story, policy analysts who might influence lawmakers, and former Crescent Tech employees with grudges tucked away in their memories. My laptop hummed like a living thing as I coded prototypes, new algorithms, stripped of Crescent Tech's greed, with transparency embedded in the core. It felt reckless. It felt holy. Some nights I almost broke. Nights I stared at Emily's hospital bracelet hanging from the lamp and thought, "You're wasting time. She needs you steady, not chasing revenge." But then I heard her voice in my memory, small but unwavering. "One day, we'll fix my heart." That promise kept my hands moving when my body begged to stop. Every secret call with Daniel, every carefully encrypted email to the handful of allies he introduced me to, ex-employees, Policy wonks. Even a reporter who owed me a favor stitched together a quiet rebellion. Redwood was too big to topple overnight. But piece by piece, I was building something stronger than revenge. A blueprint. A future. A reckoning. And through it all, I never told Emily. To her, I was just mom, burning grilled cheese sandwiches, humming along to Beyoncé while driving through the mission, tucking her in with promises of tomorrow. She didn't need to know that every lullaby I sang was also a battle cry. One night, around 3 a.m., I stood at the window with the city sprawled beneath me, freeways glowing like veins, office lights flickering where armies of coders fed the Crescent Tech machine. For the first time, I didn't feel small, I felt ready. Redwood thought they had erased me, but I was writing myself back into the story. And this time, I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was preparing to win. The summons came on a rainy Tuesday. A cream-colored envelope slipped under my apartment door, stamped with the seal of the United States Senate. My hands shook. I had been preparing for this, dreaming of this, dreading this. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The ethical boundaries of artificial intelligence. Crescent Tech was at the center of the storm. And suddenly, so was I. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Every late-night coding Helios. Every argument I had swallowed in boardrooms. Every silent tear shed in a hospital hallway. It all had a purpose. The world had believed me invisible. Now, they would have no choice but to see me. I began preparing my testimony. I didn't want to just expose Crescent Tech's theft. I wanted to tell a story they couldn't ignore. Not numbers, not code, but the human cost. The lives they gambled with. The careers they erased. And the daughter waiting at home for a heart surgery that should never have been delayed. I practiced in front of the bathroom mirror, whispering into the reflection. You're not scared. You're ready. My voice grew steadier each night. Stronger, like steel tempered in fire. Daniel helped me draft talking points, weaving the legal documents with the human narrative. I imagined the senators leaning in, the cameras capturing every word. I pictured Redwood's executives sweating as their empire's foundation was revealed for the first time. And in all those hours, through all the planning, the coding, the scheming, one truth remained. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and making sure the world remembered that Amara Bennett doesn't break. The morning of the hearing, Washington smelled like rain and iron. The streets gleamed slick under umbrellas and motorcades. I walked up the marble steps of the Capitol, heels clicking against stone, each echo louder than my heartbeat. The city was alive with urgency. Journalists hustling with cameras bouncing like eager eyes of hawks. Inside, the air was cold, humming with fluorescent lights and quiet power. Lobbyists whispered, interns hustled, cameras flashed, and I kept my gaze forward. Every step toward the witness table was a pulse of purpose. When they called my name, the room stilled. I sat at the polished wood table, pale hands folded in front of me. Across, Damian Redwood and his mother Eleanor glared from behind tailored arrogance. Masks carved from betrayal. Their legal team formed an army of silver cufflinks and silent threats. The chairman adjusted his glasses. Ms. Bennett, thank you for being here. You may proceed. A hush fell. For a second, I heard nothing but the rush of blood in my ears. My throat tightened. What if my voice shook? What if they saw me as the disgruntled ex-employee Redwood had painted me to be? Then I thought of Emily, her hand small in mine, her voice whispering, one day, we'll fix my heart. I drew a breath, deep and steady, and began. I didn't start with code or patents. I started with a memory. The sterile smell of hand sanitizer in the pediatric ward. The beep of monitors keeping Emily alive. The nights I coded in hospital waiting rooms with vending machine coffee for fuel. This isn't just about numbers, I said, voice gaining strength. This is about lives. Crescent Tech developed algorithms designed not to protect, but to manipulate, to predict behavior. Yes, but also to exploit it. And when I refused to sign off, they didn't just erase my name. They tried to erase the truth. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Cameras clicked. Damian leaned forward, sharp smile like a blade. With respect, Senator, this is one disgruntled former employee. I slid the documents across the table. Patent trusts. Contracts. Evidence that Crescent Tech had stolen my work. This isn't opinion, I said. This is ownership. 70% of the intellectual property belongs to me. And they've used it to pursue military contracts. Without consent. Without disclosure. The room erupted, reporters whispering. Senators leaning in. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Damian's face flushed crimson. One senator asked, Ms. Bennett, are you saying Crescent Tech knowingly misled this committee? I met his eyes. Unwavering. I'm saying Crescent Tech built an empire on deception. And if we let companies like this define the future of AI, we're not building progress. We're building a machine without a soul. For a beat, silence, heavy, electric. Then applause, first scattered, then swelling from the gallery. Senators joined. Reporters surged forward, microphones swinging. Damian tried to speak, but his words drowned in the uproar. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. Face carved in stone. I sat, trembling, not from fear, but release. The weight of 25 years. Of stolen credit. Of sleepless nights. Finally shifted. That night, back in my hotel room, I looked at the glowing Capitol dome. My phone buzzed endlessly. Calls. Texts. Headlines. Ex-Crescent VP exposes scandal. AI ethics bombshell. David versus Goliath in Washington. I didn't answer. Instead, I called Emily. Mom? Yes, baby. Did you win? I closed my eyes, tears breaking free. Not yet, I whispered, but tonight, we lit the match. The cracks spread faster than I imagined. The next morning, the skyline buzzed with news helicopters. Every channel, every headline screamed the same story. Crescent Tech under federal investigation. The company I had defended with sleepless nights was unraveling live on national television. On Wall Street, the stock plummeted. Brokers shouted. Screens glowed red. A decade of market dominance vanished in hours. By noon, Damian's secrets poured out. Private texts leaked. Photos with defense contractors splashed across tabloids. Debts hidden in shell companies exposed. Reporters camped outside his penthouse. Microphones thrust forward. The Golden Boy's laugh faltered. The cracks betrayed him. Then Eleanor appeared. The matriarch, who once commanded Silicon Valley with a glance, stepped to the press podium. Cameras clicked like gunfire as she adjusted her pearls. Trembling, her statement, brief, polished, crushing in its simplicity. Effective immediately. I resign as CEO. Flashbulbs didn't forgive her. I watched on a muted TV in a cafe. Redwood employees streamed out, cardboard boxes in arms, faces ranging from anger to confusion. For years, they believed in an empire. Now it was smoke. I expected triumph, justice, maybe even revenge. Instead, I felt complicated. I remembered young engineers, brilliant kids who believed in change, interns who looked up to me. Late-night pizza runs when exhaustion felt like glory. They hadn't betrayed me. They were collateral, swallowed by the hunger of the powerful. And yet, beneath grief, relief rose. Truth prevailed. The empire that had erased me had finally been erased itself. I sank into the hotel chair, hands shaking, and whispered into the dark. We didn't just survive. We rebuilt. Outside, Washington moved, oblivious to one woman's victory. But inside, I felt the pulse of justice. Steady and unstoppable. The story wasn't over. Not for me. Not for Emily. Not for the engineers and dreamers silenced in the shadow of power. This was just the beginning. As I stepped out of the cafe into the cold wind of Manhattan, the city biting at my cheeks and the echo of taxi horns weaving through the streets, I realized this was the real end of one story, and the fragile beginning of another. The boardroom was no longer his kingdom. Damian Redwood stood at the head of the table, tie crooked, voice ragged, words tumbling like broken glass. He raged about loyalty, betrayal, visions only he could deliver. But the room had gone cold. Not a single hand rose when the vote was called. Not one. The gavel struck, once. Sharp, final, just like that. Redwood Dynamics had a new future. Damian? escorted out by the same guards who had once marched me down that marble hallway. But I wasn't there, not this time. I watched from my kitchen table, the television casting a blue glow across the walls. News anchors spoke in measured tones. Redwood CEO ousted after historic collapse. The ticker scrolling below. Headlines that once would have seemed impossible. They called me the Silent Architect, a name I never asked for, but maybe one I had earned. I didn't cheer, I didn't pour champagne. My victory wasn't for cameras. It lived in quieter places, like the rhythm of my heartbeat. The stillness of my kitchen. The knowledge that every late night, every skipped birthday, every minute of sacrifice had not been erased. I walked to the closet at the back of the house. A place I hadn't opened in years. Inside, a cardboard box, heavy with dust and memories. I carried it to the table and lifted the lid. Inside, fragments of a life I had once thought belonged to Redwood Dynamics. The faded ID badge with my photo, eyes still bright with ambition. A stack of notebooks, margins full of contingency sketches, plans no one would ever read. A printed email celebrating my 10th year at the company, a celebration I'd missed in Tokyo. Negotiating deals that had kept Redwood afloat. And at the bottom, a Polaroid of Emily, taped to a laptop I no longer used. Her small smile, her hand curled in mine. Each object was a weight. Compressed years of sacrifice into something small enough to lift, yet heavy enough to remind me of everything I had endured. I picked up the badge. My thumb traced the rough edges. Once, it had meant everything, the price of absences, the anchor that tied me to an empire I thought I was building. Now, it meant something else. It meant I had survived. Damian thought firing me would erase me. Stripping titles, offices, and access would mark the end. But the collapse of Redwood Dynamics proved the opposite. The networks I built endured. The systems I coded. The contracts I safeguarded. The integrity woven into every line. Those were my fingerprints. Too deep to erase. For years, my silence had been humiliation. Tonight, it was power. Not revenge. Not rage. Just release. I placed the badge back in the box. Closed the lid. Lighter now. Almost fragile. Like a chapter I could finally set aside. Outside, the city moved without pause. Horns honked. A dog barked. Rain drifted through the cracked window. Life went on. And me? For the first time in 25 years, I felt free to ask. What comes next? Because triumph doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is silent. Sometimes it looks like a woman closing a box, setting it aside, and realizing she no longer carries its weight. And maybe, just maybe, it looks like the beginning of a life yet unwritten. They thought they were writing my ending. That night in the boardroom, when Damian paraded his power, when the board's silence became complicity, when 2 security guards walked me down that marble hallway, I thought so too. Redwood Dynamics had been my universe. To be cut off felt like drifting into outer space. Untethered, forgotten. But endings disguise themselves as beginnings. I used to believe success was something you could hold in your hand, stock options. Promotions. Corner offices with glass views of Manhattan. I thought if I gave enough, bled enough, sacrificed enough, the ground beneath me would be steady, where nothing could be taken. I had learned the hard way. Stability is an illusion. Power is fleeting. But resilience? Resilience is permanent. It lives in every late-night coding in a hospital waiting room. In every whispered promise to a child. In every secret fight fought in silence. I stacked the notebooks back in the box, leaving a space for a new one, blank. Waiting. A place for sketches not of a company, but of a life rebuilt. I stepped back from the table, breathing deep. Manhattan stretched beyond my window, alive with endless possibility. The city that once witnessed my erasure now watched me rise. Because this time, I wasn't just surviving, I was writing. Every choice, every line, every moment of courage shaping the next chapter. And the best part? I could write it on my own terms. No boardroom could define me. No algorithm could bind me. No one could take my story away again. I was wrong. Because they did take it. The job, the title, the identity I had wrapped around myself like armor. They stripped it all away. And yet, here I stand. The lesson is simple, but it cut deeper than any betrayal. What they take from you is never the whole of you. I think back to nights coding by the dim glow of a single desk lamp. Emily's soft breathing echoing down the hall. Birthday parties I missed. Family dinners eaten cold from takeout containers while my laptop hummed beside me. I told myself it was worth it, that the sacrifice would one day be redeemed by recognition, stability, legacy. But legacy is a dangerous word. It makes you believe permanence exists. It doesn't. Redwood taught me that. Damian taught me that. The board taught me that. And yet, the shadow network I built endured. Not because it was flawless, but because it followed one rule I had forgotten to apply to myself. Integrity sustains what ego cannot. That was my first lesson. The second came quieter, in the gentle voice of my daughter. Emily, the night she asked, "So they just threw you away?" Her words struck harder than any insult. For years I had traded moments of her childhood for loyalty to a company that never deserved it. I thought I was protecting her by protecting Redwood. But what I didn't see was the lesson I was teaching her. That love could wait. That presence was optional. That sacrifice without gratitude was normal. That night, I realized my story was not about systems or betrayals. It was about the legacy I choose to leave. Legacy not in stock options, office titles, or recognition, but in presence. In truth, in love, the kind of legacy that sits across from you at the kitchen table. Barefoot, eyes wet with unspoken disappointment, yet hearts still connected. The system I built will outlast Redwood, but the lesson I leave my daughter will outlast me. That was my second lesson. The third came only after silence became my ally. For so long, silence had been humiliation. When the board stayed quiet as Damian stole my work. When colleagues lowered their eyes as I was escorted out, silence was exile. But then I discovered it could be something else. It could be a boundary, a weapon, a choice that didn't cut, but revealed. When Damian called me months later, voice stripped of arrogance, promising me everything I had once longed for, I answered with silence. Not because I hated him, not for revenge, but because silence finally belonged to me. It wasn't surrender. It was power. It was peace. That was my third lesson. So what do I want to leave you with? Not a story of collapse, but of release. Not a warning about betrayal, but a promise that you are more than the places that discard you. To the young woman staring at rejection letters. To the man who just lost the job he thought was forever. To the mother wondering if her sacrifices will ever be enough. To anyone who feels erased, obsolete, invisible. Hear me. You are not what they take. You are what you choose to build next. Success is not applause. It is not headlines. It is not the corner office. Success is standing at the ruins of what you thought was your future and realizing you still have a voice. Success is the courage to begin again. Success is the quiet power of showing up for yourself, even when no one else does. These days, when I close my notebook, I don't write profit forecasts or contingency charts. I write one line, over and over, a promise to myself and to anyone who ever feels forgotten. We are never obsolete, we are only unfinished. And maybe that's the true gift my journey offers. Not the shadow network, not the headlines, not the poetic justice of seeing arrogance undone. The gift is a spark, a whisper in the dark. A reminder that even when systems fail, even when people betray, even when the world seems indifferent, our essence remains unclaimed, unbroken. Carry it with you. Let it guide you through your own silence. Let it remind you that the power to rise, to reclaim, to create your life on your own terms, has always been inside you. That endings are never the end. They are beginnings in disguise. And in that truth, I finally understood. Every step, every late night, every silent fight, every moment I thought I was alone, was a rehearsal. A preparation for the woman I am today. Amara Bennett, survivor, architect, mother, warrior. And now, finally, author of her own story. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or dismissed because of who you are, listen. Amara Bennett was erased, her work stolen, her loyalty rewarded with betrayal. But she didn't quit. She didn't let them write her story. She fought, she reclaimed, and she won. This is a reminder for you. Your voice matters. Your ideas matter. Your grind, your hustle, your legacy, it's yours to protect and grow. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Stand tall, build smart, fight for what's rightfully yours. Your story isn't defined by the people who tried to erase you. It's defined by the courage to rise, the wisdom to stay true, and the fire to create what's next. So today, stand like Amara. Begin again. Claim your space. Protect your people. And never forget, being underestimated is your advantage. Comment below. What's your next move? Who are you fighting for? Tag someone who needs this reminder today.